the destruction of the first Death Star may have been acceptable in a legal sense, but the second Death Star, it was still being constructed, and there are a whole lot of construction workers on the Death Star. So how do we regard the status of those construction workers?
We're a long way away from a real-life Star Wars, right?
When you look at science fiction movies like Star Trek or Star Wars, many of the principles of the law of armed conflict that are real get reflected in those films, in that you may only attack military objectives. You only engage civilians who take a direct part in hostilities. You need to respect those who are wounded or who have surrendered.
Academics from institutions around the world are leading the conversation about the potential effects of armed warfare in outer space.
So what we're finding at the moment is that states are militarizing space. They're putting up assets that help with or assist in the land, air and sea environments of armed conflict. And because of that reliance, what we're seeing is that states are also anticipating the possibility of armed conflict occurring in space.
We have had instances of testing of anti-satellite missiles or use of anti-satellite missiles and sort of indications of counter-space capabilities, and there are strategic reasons why states would want to have those capabilities.
They're drafting up the manual on international law applicable to military uses of outer space, or MILAMOS for short. The people drafting it hope it will serve as a guide for nations if extraterrestrial armed conflict does come to pass.
You have to find effective and efficient ways for us all to discuss some very complex issues and bring us all to consensus, because we're trying to articulate a consensus view on what a group of experts believe the law to be.
And I think that the important thing about our project is that we're not trying to create new law, we're not trying to set a course for what we think is the best law, we're merely trying to track what existing law we think applies to regulate activity in outer space. And remembering that the law of armed conflict exists to try and protect civilian lives, protect civilian infrastructure, and allow the excesses of warfare to be minimised when it comes to civilian activity.
There are currently 5 global treaties specific to space. Only one article directly deals with military activity, which prohibits the placement of weapons of mass destruction in space.
Some of the things that apply to space right now is under the Outer Space Treaty is that you cannot claim sovereignty over anything in space. So you can't claim the moon, you can't claim an asteroid, you can't claim a piece of space as your own, and that's clear. When you look at that, when you look at what states are doing in outer space, it is very much like the high seas. And that means that you can use analogies from the high seas, from maritime law, as a sort of a foundational reference point for starting your examination of what occurs in space.
So that means I'm going to be taking a craft over in international waters without permission, which by definition makes me a pirate. Mark Watney, space pirate.
Contrary to what the main character in the movie The Martian said, law of the sea doesn't apply directly in space. It's a good analogy, but it doesn't apply directly in outer space.
And it's the possibility of us one day colonizing Mars that also raises further questions of whether our current rules regarding warfare would be applicable to the Red Planet.
With Elon Musk's desire and potential capability to go to Mars, it does raise the issue that we've never faced in humanity before about how law might develop on Mars. If we start colonizing Mars, is our international law that we've developed over hundreds of years here on Earth, is that applicable to Mars, or is there a new law that might develop in that context?
Of course, we're nowhere near armed conflict in outer space yet, but the MILAMOS project does hope to make sure all nations are aware of the consequences of cosmic combat. And hopefully, they'll listen. Otherwise, the galactic conflicts of our favorite science fiction films could one day become a frightening reality.